He wrote, "I didn't sign up for fatherhood." But 3 years later, the Millionaire CEO collapsed in the snow, because the two little girls staring back at him had his blue eyes. Mark Reynolds had written thousands of letters in his life, contracts, executive approvals, dismissals, formal notices, but none were as cruelly efficient as the one he sent that winter morning. The words came easily to him, colder than the marble floor of his office and sharper than the pen that carved them into paper. He didn't reread the letter before sliding it into the envelope. He didn't hesitate when handing it to his assistant. He didn't even think of the woman who would unfold it with trembling fingers. For Mark, it was just another task completed, another inconvenience dealt with quickly and cleanly. He had no idea how deeply those words would echo back to him in the years to come. Clara received the letter while sitting at the tiny kitchen table of her modest apartment. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft patterns on the peeling linoleum floor. She had hoped, prayed, for something different. Even a refusal delivered with confusion or fear would have been easier to accept. But when she opened the envelope and her eyes traced the short, clipped lines, her breath caught painfully in her chest. "I didn't sign up for fatherhood," he had written. No greeting. No explanation. No humanity. Just those words, polished and final, separating her from him as ruthlessly as if he had slashed a rope between them. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, though she wasn't far along yet. She could barely feel anything physically, but emotionally the presence of the life inside her overwhelmed her. She had imagined telling him in person. She imagined the shock on his face softening into something warmer. She imagined him taking responsibility, trying, at least trying, to be part of something bigger than himself. But Mark Reynolds didn't want bigger. He wanted clean, precise, controlled. She realized then that he had never really seen her. Not truly. She had been a pleasant distraction at best, a complication at worst. Clara sank to the floor, the letter slipping from her fingers. Tears rose hot and unstoppable. It wasn't just grief for the relationship she thought she'd had, it was the crushing fear of facing motherhood alone. She buried her face in her hands, shaking, unable to breathe through the tangle of worry and humiliation strangling her. The silence of the apartment wrapped around her tightly, as if mocking her for believing she could matter to someone like Mark. Hours passed before she was able to stand again. She pressed the letter flat on the table, staring at every heartless stroke of his pen. Something inside her hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. If he wanted nothing to do with the child, then he would have nothing to do with either of them. She wouldn't beg him for support, wouldn't allow him to reappear later out of guilt, wouldn't raise her baby in the shadow of a man who had abandoned them before their life had even begun. She folded the letter once more, not carefully, but with the blunt finality it deserved, and dropped it into the trash. The next morning she packed her belongings with unsteady hands. She left behind the few memories of their time together, a framed photo, a forgotten scarf he once draped over her shoulders, a half-empty bottle of wine they planned to share. She didn't allow herself a single glance back as she closed the door to the apartment. She boarded a bus with her suitcase and the growing weight of her unborn children. And as the city blurred behind her, she whispered a promise to the life inside her, "I'll protect you. Even if I have to protect you from him." She didn't know where she was going yet. She didn't know how she would manage. All she knew was that she couldn't stay, not in the city where she had given her heart to a man who had crushed it without a second thought, not surrounded by reminders of the future she once believed in. That morning became the quiet beginning of a new life, one shaped not by Mark's rejection, but by her determination to survive and give her children a world without his coldness shadowing over them. And as the bus carried her farther and farther away, Clara pressed her hand to her stomach again. For the first time since opening the letter, she felt something other than grief. It wasn't hope, not yet, but the faint spark of strength. A strength she would need more than she could possibly imagine. Clara's new life began on a bus headed north, its windows frosted from the December cold and its seats half empty. The ride was long and quiet, giving her too much time to think, but also just enough time to breathe without feeling like the walls were closing in. She had chosen the town almost at random. She found it listed on a faded brochure left in the seat pocket, a small place in Maine with nothing remarkable about it except that it was far from everything she needed to escape. When she stepped off the bus hours later, snowflakes clung to her eyelashes, and the sharp winter air stung her lungs. But at least no one knew her here. At least no one expected anything from her. The town was peaceful in a way she hadn't realized she craved. Rows of small shops lined Main Street, their windows filled with handmade decorations. A tiny bakery sent the scent of cinnamon into the air, and strings of holiday lights were draped across the lampposts, glowing softly against the falling snow. It was the kind of place where people waved even when they didn't know you, where footsteps were the loudest sound on most evenings, where time moved a little slower. She found a furnished room above the local bookstore, a single bed, a wobbly table, and a radiator that clanked every hour, but it was warm, safe, and hers. She started working part-time at the town library within a week. The job didn't pay much, but she liked the quiet hum of the place. She liked the smell of old paper, the creak of wooden floors, and the feeling of being surrounded by stories far bigger than her own. The librarian, Mrs. Thompson, was an elderly woman with a gentle voice and a habit of offering homemade cookies to everyone. She didn't ask questions about Clara's past. She simply smiled and said, "We're glad to have you." It was more kindness than Clara expected from anyone. But as the weeks passed, her pregnancy became increasingly difficult to hide. The nausea came in waves, steady and persistent. The dizziness left her gripping shelves until the room stopped spinning. One afternoon she nearly fainted while stacking returned books, and Mrs. Thompson gently insisted she take a break. They sat together at the library counter, and for the first time Clara admitted, not the details, but the truth. "I'm expecting," she whispered, bracing herself for judgment. Instead, the older woman's eyes softened. "Then you're not alone," she said simply. "Not anymore." It was the first time Clara cried since leaving the city. The winter deepened, and with it came the reality of her pregnancy. She attended her first checkup at the small clinic on the edge of town. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a calm presence, guided the ultrasound wand across Clara's stomach. The room filled with static-like sounds before the monitor flickered to life, showing the faint outline of a tiny shape. Clara's breath hitched, but before she could speak, the doctor frowned slightly and adjusted the screen. "Wait," she murmured. "There's something else here." Clara's pulse quickened. The doctor smiled then, warm and reassuring. "Congratulations. You're having twins." The word echoed in Clara's mind, twins. 2 babies. 2 lives. 2 futures depending entirely on her. Shock washed over her first, followed by fear so intense it nearly knocked the air from her lungs. But beneath it all, somewhere deep inside her, something else stirred, an instinctive, fierce kind of love she had never felt before. She blinked at the monitor, tears blurring the 2 tiny silhouettes. The bus ride, the letter, the pain, they all felt distant suddenly, overshadowed by the miraculous truth glowing on the screen. She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach, whispering silently to the little hearts beating within her. She wasn't alone anymore. As her pregnancy progressed, life became a delicate balance of exhaustion, determination, and quiet hope. She bought second-hand baby clothes at the local thrift shop, washed them late at night, and folded them with trembling hands. She took evening walks through the snowy streets, breathing in the cold air and imagining what life would look like once the babies arrived. She began saving every dollar she could, cutting her meals in half some days, skipping new clothes, working extra shifts at the library whenever Mrs. Thompson allowed it. Despite the challenges, the town slowly began to feel like home. People greeted her warmly. Neighbors brought over hot soup when the weather turned rough. Children in the library showed her drawings and asked when her tiny people were coming. For the first time in months, she felt something steady beneath her feet. But the nights were still hard. The loneliness crept in like cold wind through cracks in the window. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, fighting the memories of Mark, his piercing eyes, his confident smile, his voice saying words she couldn't forget no matter how hard she tried. I didn't sign up for fatherhood. She wondered if he ever thought of her. Wondered if he would have cared, even a little, if things had been different. But she pushed the thoughts away. She had no space left for him. Her life was now shaped by the two heartbeats inside her, not by the man who denied them. And on one particularly cold night, wrapped in a thick blanket, she whispered into the quiet room, "I'll do this. I'll raise you. I'll give you the life you deserve." She didn't know then how strong she would have to become. She didn't know how deeply motherhood would change her. She didn't know that across the state, the man who rejected her would one day regret it so fiercely that it would remake him too. For now, all she knew was that her new life had begun. And she was determined not to look back. Mark Reynolds had always believed he understood the architecture of his own life, its strengths, its weaknesses, its limits. He built his world on precision and control, shaping every minute of every day with the detached efficiency of someone who feared chaos more than loneliness. For years, that structure had served him well. It had made him wealthy, respected, untouchable. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the flawless design began to crack. What started as small fractures, restless nights, unexplainable distractions, a certain heaviness he carried in his chest, grew into something larger, something that made him question whether the life he had constructed was truly one he wanted to live. He first noticed the shift about 6 months after sending Clara the letter. He couldn't explain what triggered it. Perhaps it was the silence that followed, a silence he had expected to feel freeing but instead felt unsettlingly empty. Perhaps it was the way his apartment seemed colder than usual at night, or how the clatter of his key hitting the marble counter became the only sound greeting him when he came home. He tried to ignore it, drowning himself in work, meetings, and responsibilities. He won awards, earned praise from investors, and appeared on the covers of business magazines. Yet every triumph left him feeling strangely hollow, as if the applause wasn't meant for him but for a version of himself he no longer recognized. At first, he chalked it up to stress. CEOs carried burdens no one else understood. He told himself he just needed rest, a brief vacation, another project to ignite excitement again. But nothing worked. When he sat in boardrooms surrounded by confident voices, his thoughts drifted unpredictably. He found himself distracted, unfocused, haunted by flashes of brown hair, warm laughter, gentle eyes. Clara's presence lingered in the corners of his memory, an unwelcome ghost that refused to leave. He didn't admit to himself that he missed her. He didn't admit that her departure felt like something stolen from him, a loss so sharp it scraped at old wounds he didn't even realize he had. Instead, he became irritable and unpredictable. His employees noticed his temper shortening, his patience thinning. He would give harsh feedback over minor mistakes, then feel an uncharacteristic pang of guilt hours later. His assistant learned to tread carefully, offering coffee at the perfect temperature and staying silent unless spoken to. Even his closest colleagues sensed something shifting behind his polished exterior. One night, after a tense meeting that left him unusually shaken, Mark returned home to an apartment lit only by the distant city glow outside his windows. He stood there without turning on the lights, watching tiny headlights crawl along the streets far below. For the first time, he felt small in the very space meant to make him feel powerful. The silence felt heavier than usual, almost suffocating. When he finally moved, it was only to open a drawer and take out the old keychain Clara had once bought for him, a cheap, silly thing shaped like a lighthouse, a tiny joke between them because he once admitted he hated the ocean. He stared at it for a long time, tracing its chipped paint with his thumb. He hadn't thought about the story behind it in months, but now the memory returned sharply. It was the first gift she ever gave him, back when their connection was still new and warm and full of possibilities. He remembered the look on her face when she handed it to him, playful yet hopeful, as if afraid he wouldn't understand the gesture. He remembered teasing her about it, then pocketing it anyway, secretly touched by her thoughtfulness. And suddenly, he wondered what had become of that sweetness, of that girl, of that chance he never realized he'd had until it was gone. He tried to dismiss these thoughts, but they persisted. They seeped into his dreams, turning restful nights into restless ones where Clara's face appeared only to blur and fade before he could reach her. He started waking up in the middle of the night with the unsettling feeling that he had missed something important, something irreversible. By the end of the first year, denial was no longer enough. He found himself lingering on social media, searching for any trace of her. Nothing. He asked acquaintances quietly if they had heard from her. No one had. The city was large enough for a person to disappear entirely without a ripple. But the silence bothered him more each day. By the end of the second year, the guilt began to crystallize. He replayed the words from his letter in his mind, no matter how hard he tried to silence them. I didn't sign up for fatherhood. The sentence had seemed practical at the time, an explanation for boundaries he believed he needed. Now, it sounded cruel, childish, cowardly. Without meaning to, he began imagining different versions of that moment. What if he had asked her what she needed? What if he had listened? What if he had cared? Every alternate choice led to a future he didn't have. He didn't know why the thought of her carrying his child terrified him at first, perhaps because he had feared responsibility, perhaps because he feared repeating the mistakes of his own father. But now that fear twisted into something else, regret, longing, and the piercing realization that he had rejected something irreplaceable. By the third year, avoiding the truth was impossible. Mark found himself staring at an empty chair in his penthouse more often than he cared to admit. He found himself pausing near the baby clothes aisle at department stores, feeling foolish but unable to look away. He found himself imagining Clara holding a child, his child, alone, tired, scared, determined. And the image shattered him every time. It was during one of these nights, after a particularly painful dream, that he made the decision. He sat at his desk long after midnight, fingers clasped, determination hardening inside him with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was going to find her. Even if it took months. Even if it took everything he had. He wasn't searching for redemption, he wasn't sure he deserved that. He wasn't searching for forgiveness, he doubted she would ever give it. He was searching because the truth felt unbearable. Because not knowing had become a punishment. Because somewhere out there, a part of him might exist without him having ever met it. And this time, he wouldn't turn away. It took 3 months of relentless searching before Mark finally found the first thread that didn't unravel in his hands. By then, he had gone through 3 private investigation teams, dozens of dead ends, and more sleepless nights than he could count. His days became a cycle of board meetings where his mind wandered and late evenings spent combing through reports, addresses, and vague witness statements. Each time he got close, the trail dissolved. It was as if Clara had predicted his search and deliberately erased every trace she had left behind. But on a frozen January morning, when the third investigative firm called him back with a hesitant note in their voice, he felt something stir deep in his chest, something dangerously close to hope. A former co-worker of Clara's had recognized her from an old photo and mentioned that she'd left the city suddenly years ago, heading somewhere north. It was vague, imprecise, but it was more than anything he had received before. Mark canceled his afternoon meetings, sent a terse message to his assistant that he would be unreachable, and began personally sorting through every northern town, every address, every hiring record within a 300-mile radius. He had never worked so obsessively on anything that didn't involve billions of dollars, and the weight of that truth wasn't lost on him. Clara had become his priority in a way nothing else ever had. Weeks passed before another clue emerged, a blurry security photo from a grocery store miles away in a small Maine town. The investigator wasn't even sure it was her, but Mark knew instantly. There was something in the tilt of her head, the cautious way she held the shopping basket, the familiar curve of her profile. He stared at the image long enough for the investigator to shift uncomfortably beside him. He didn't look away. When he finally lifted his eyes, his voice was steady. "Find the town. Find everywhere she might be living. I'll take care of the rest." And he did. He didn't send assistants or bodyguards. He drove there himself. The journey took hours, the landscape transforming gradually as he left the city behind. Skyscrapers gave way to bare forests, the roads narrowing and winding as snow began to fall in thicker flakes. The farther he drove, the more his chest tightened with anticipation and fear. He had rehearsed a dozen scenarios, her slamming the door in his face, her refusing to speak to him, her having moved on completely. But none of his imagined outcomes eased the turmoil inside him. He wasn't prepared for any of it. He arrived in the small town at dusk. The streets were lined with old-fashioned lampposts wrapped in white lights. Children pulled sleds behind them, bundled in coats so puffy they looked like walking snowballs. The smell of wood smoke drifted through the air. Everything looked gentle, peaceful, untouched by the chaos he carried with him. Mark felt entirely out of place in his expensive coat and polished shoes, but he ignored the stares from passers-by as he walked down Main Street. He visited every location the investigator had listed. A grocery store clerk vaguely remembered a woman matching Clara's description but couldn't recall when she had last been in. The librarian at the town's bookstore didn't recognize the photo, though she admitted new faces were common around the holidays. At a small diner, an elderly waitress studied the picture for a long time before nodding slowly and saying, "She comes by sometimes. Quiet. Polite. Real sweet. Usually with 2 little girls." 2 little girls. The words hit him like a blow. Mark sat down abruptly at the counter, unable to stand for a moment as the world spun in slow, disorienting circles. He had prepared himself for the possibility of a child. But hearing about 2 children, 2 girls who might have his eyes, his laugh, his smile, shook him in a way he couldn't describe. He pressed a hand to his forehead, forcing himself to breathe as the waitress continued speaking. "They're beautiful little things," she added fondly. "Blonde hair. Big blue eyes. Just like their mama. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Twins." There was no room for doubt. They were his. His daughters. And he had never seen them. The weight of it pressed down on him so hard his chest burned. He thanked the waitress with a hoarse voice and staggered outside into the cold. Snow fell steadily, settling on his hair and coat, and he let it numb him. Only when he felt he could control his breathing again did he continue searching. Following another lead, he walked to a small park near the edge of town. Pine trees circled the space like silent guardians, and a frozen pond glistened beneath the moonlight. He didn't expect to find her there at that hour, but he felt drawn to the place as if something waited for him among the drifted snow. He paused near a wooden bench, the same one she would sit on the next day, and looked at the empty swings swaying gently in the wind. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the quiet settle over him. He imagined her here with 2 little girls, laughing as snowflakes landed in their hair. He imagined their voices echoing in the cold air, their small footprints marking the ground. It was an image so vivid it hurt. For the first time in years, he let himself cry. Silent tears, disappearing into the snow before anyone could see them. He cried for the birthdays he'd missed. For the nights she had cried alone. For the cruelty of his letter. For the father he hadn't been. For the man he had been back then. When he finally opened his eyes, everything inside him was different. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow, I will find her. Tomorrow, I will see them. And no matter how she looks at me, no matter how much she hates me, I won't run again. Not from her. Not from them. Not from the truth I should have embraced years ago. Clara bundled the girls in their winter coats, looping soft scarves around their small necks and tugging mittens over their tiny hands. Emma wriggled impatiently, buzzing with excitement the same way she always did before going outside, while Eliza stood still and waited quietly, her bright blue eyes watching her mother with a gentleness that made Clara's heart ache. Snow had fallen the entire night and piled in shimmering drifts along the park paths. It was the kind of morning that made the world look soft and magical, as if everything painful had been buried under white. She needed that illusion of peace. After another sleepless night filled with restless dreams and sharp memories, she felt fragile. She wanted fresh air. She wanted her daughters to laugh. She wanted to pretend for a little while that nothing could hurt them. So she took them to the park, their favorite place, where they could build snowmen and chase each other around the benches. The moment they arrived, Emma squealed with delight and plunged into the snow, kicking it into the air. Eliza giggled softly and followed, holding her mother's hand before letting go to join her sister. Clara exhaled, watching them play, her breath forming clouds that drifted away into the frozen air. She took a seat on the wooden bench and rubbed her gloved hands together, feeling the cold slowly creep into her bones. For several minutes, the world was calm. The twins ran in circles, their voices bright and musical. The sun peeked through scattered clouds, catching in their blonde hair and making them glow. Clara closed her eyes briefly, trying to hold on to the moment. Then footsteps crunched behind her. Slow, steady, too deliberate to be a passerby. She opened her eyes and turned her head. Her breath stopped. Mark Reynolds stood only a few feet away. He looked nothing like the immaculate executive she once knew. His hair was tousled from the wind, his coat dusted with snowflakes, his cheeks flushed from the cold. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held something she had never seen in them before. Something raw. Something wounded. Something desperate. Clara felt her stomach twist painfully. She surged to her feet as if a jolt of electricity shot through her. "What are you doing here?" Her voice cracked, though she tried to make it firm. Mark swallowed hard, his breath visible in the air as he exhaled slowly. "I found you." The word struck her like a gust of icy wind, and she instinctively stepped between him and the girls. Emma and Eliza were still playing, unaware of the storm unfolding behind them. "You need to leave." Clara tried to keep her voice steady, though fear made her pulse race. "Right now." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not leaving. Not until I speak to you." His gaze flicked briefly toward the twins, and Clara saw something break in him, something deep and profoundly painful. "Not until I understand." Her breath hitched, but she didn't let him see her falter. "There's nothing to understand. You made everything perfectly clear 3 years ago." The reminder cut him, she could see it. His expression tightened, and he looked down for a moment as if bracing himself. "I know what I said. I know how cruel it was. I've replayed it every day since." Clara wanted to scream at him that replaying wasn't enough, that replaying didn't change the nights she cried, the months she struggled alone, the terror she felt in every uncertain moment of pregnancy, the sleepless nights caring for 2 babies by herself. She wanted to tell him that his regret couldn't erase 3 years of abandonment. But she didn't trust herself to speak without breaking. So she said, "You shouldn't be here." Mark lifted his eyes then, and she was struck by how much pain swirled in them. "I had to see you. I had to see them. Clara, please." A small voice interrupted him. Emma had turned around. She froze mid-step, her snow-covered mittens still in the air. "Mommy, who's that?" Clara's heart hammered violently. She glanced at Mark, terrified, because this was the moment she had prayed would never come. Before she could answer, Mark stepped back, raising his hands as if trying not to scare anyone. His voice softened, cracking slightly. "Hi." Eliza ran to her sister's side, tilting her head curiously. "Mama? Why's that man sad?" Clara's throat constricted. Mark looked devastated, unable to take his gaze off the girls. He blinked rapidly, as if forcing himself not to cry. "There." He hesitated, then looked at Clara with a pleading expression. "Are they?" She clenched her jaw. "Yes." Mark inhaled sharply. His knees nearly buckled. He pressed a hand to his mouth, and a broken sound escaped him, a mix of disbelief and anguish. For a moment, Clara's anger softened, despite everything. Because watching him quietly fall apart at the sight of his children, she realized something she had never expected. He hadn't been prepared for fatherhood 3 years ago, but he absolutely was not prepared for this moment either. Emma stepped forward bravely. "Why are you crying?" she asked, her voice full of innocent concern. Mark knelt slowly, so slowly it looked like his legs might give out. He wiped his face with the back of his glove and whispered, "Because I'm happy to see you." Clara felt her world tilt. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for him. But the twins, pure-hearted, curious, unburdened by the past, moved closer to him. Eliza's small fingers curled around Clara's coat, but she didn't hide. Emma approached him openly, with fearless curiosity. Clara exhaled shakily, fighting the flood of emotions rising in her chest. This was the moment she feared. This was the moment she wanted to freeze and flee from at the same time. Mark looked up at her, his eyes filled with a plea she couldn't decipher. "Please," he said quietly, "just give me a chance to explain." Clara stared at him, at their daughters, at the snow swirling softly around them, and felt her entire life shifting under her feet. She didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. But she also didn't walk away. Clara didn't sleep that night. Even after putting the girls to bed, even after the house fell into a deep, winter silence, her mind refused to stop spinning. She sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea, staring at the faint ring of frost forming along the windowpane. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark kneeling in the snow, tears on his face, staring at their daughters as if the world had shifted beneath him. She hated the way that image softened something in her. She hated that a part of her still cared. She hated that the past wasn't staying buried like she wanted it to. Meanwhile, across town in a hotel room far too luxurious for the quiet little village, Mark lay awake on crisp white sheets, staring at the ceiling and replaying the moment he saw the twins. It felt as if his heart had been cracked open, exposing every fragile, aching part of him he had tried to lock away. He had imagined seeing Clara again, imagined apologizing, imagined rejection. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of 2 tiny girls, his girls, laughing in the snow, unaware that their father stood a few feet away breaking into pieces. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, struggling to hold back another wave of emotion. He had spent 3 years searching for Clara, regretting what he had done, imagining how he would fix it. But the moment he saw the twins, regret changed into something deeper, heavier, nearly unbearable. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about the 3 years of their lives he had missed. The birthdays, the first steps, the late-night fevers, the first words, everything had happened without him. And the knowledge hollowed him out. The next morning, Clara tried to go about her routine, pretending nothing had changed. She dressed the girls, made oatmeal, and braided their hair. But her hands trembled, and her voice kept cracking when she reminded them to put on their boots. The twins sensed her tension, even if they didn't understand it. Emma asked if the sad man would be in the park again. Eliza wondered softly if he needed help. Clara felt something twist inside her. Her daughters had never known rejection. They had never known cruelty. They had never known the coldness she had experienced the day she read that letter. They saw kindness first, always. She wanted to protect that innocence. But she also knew she couldn't hide Mark's existence forever. Not after yesterday. Not after the way he had looked at them. Not after the way the girls had naturally gravitated toward him. She tried to convince herself it would be best if he simply left, but deep down she knew he wouldn't. Not now. And she wasn't sure she wanted him to. That truth scared her more than anything. When she finally stepped outside with the twins bundled in their coats, she wasn't surprised to see Mark standing near the end of her walkway. He wasn't dressed like a CEO today. He wore a plain jacket, jeans, and gloves. He looked older than she remembered, tired, quieter, stripped of the arrogant confidence he once carried. He stayed a respectful distance away as if afraid any closer step would make her flee. "I didn't want to ambush you," he said softly. "I just needed to know you were all right." Clara let out a shaky breath. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he admitted. "But I'm here anyway." Eliza peeked out from behind Clara's coat, tilting her head with the same gentle curiosity she had shown yesterday. Emma stared openly, unafraid. Mark lowered himself to a crouch so he wouldn't tower over them. Clara felt her heart lurch at the gesture. "Hi again," he murmured, offering a tentative smile. "I'm Mark." Emma frowned. "That's a short name." He let out a surprised breath of laughter. "It is, isn't it?" Eliza stepped a little closer. "Why were you crying yesterday?" Clara's breath caught. She waited, tense, ready to intervene if he said anything wrong. Mark's expression softened in a way Clara had never seen before, gentle, vulnerable, ashamed. "Because," he said quietly, "I saw something very special. And I realized how much I'd missed." Emma blinked. "What did you miss?" He swallowed hard, glancing at Clara before returning his gaze to the twins. "A lot. More than I can ever fix." Clara felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. She didn't want him to soften her. She didn't want her heart to remember the man she once cared for. But seeing him like this, humble, hurting, trying, it broke down the walls she'd spent years reinforcing. "Girls," Clara said gently, "why don't you go play for a bit?" Emma grabbed her sister's hand and pulled her toward a pile of snow. Clara watched them run off before turning to Mark. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't hesitate. "A chance." She almost laughed, bitter, exhausted, disbelieving. "A chance for what?" "To know them." He inhaled deeply. "To be their father. And, if you'll let me, to make things right with you." Clara shook her head, staring at him with raw pain. "You didn't want to be a father. You made that perfectly clear." Mark's shoulders slumped. "I was terrified. And selfish. And stupid. I thought rejecting responsibility would protect me from turning into my father. Instead, it turned me into him." The confession made Clara's breath hitch. She hadn't known this part of him. She hadn't known any part of him deeply enough. "I can't undo what I did," he continued quietly. "But I can change who I am now. And I have. Clara. I've been trying to become someone worthy of being in their lives. Someone who won't run again." Clara closed her eyes, overwhelmed. She didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she couldn't deny the truth. Her heart whispered reluctantly, people could change. She had changed. Maybe he had too. When she opened her eyes, Mark was watching her with a mixture of hope and despair. "I'm not asking for forgiveness today," he said gently. "I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Clara looked over at the twins, their laughter rising into the cold air. The sight of them, two bright, beautiful children who deserved the world, guided her. "You can see them," she said slowly. "For now. Just see them." The relief that washed over Mark's face nearly shattered her. He whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. It was a beginning. A fragile, terrifying, necessary beginning. Mark returned every day after that, never uninvited, never unannounced, but always careful, always gentle, always aware that he was stepping into a life already built without him. Clara kept her distance at first, standing with crossed arms and guarded eyes, watching every interaction between him and the twins as if ready to intervene at the slightest hint of discomfort. But to her surprise, though she would never admit it aloud, Mark adapted to fatherhood with a sincerity and a tenderness she had never imagined he possessed. The first time he read to them, he stumbled over the voices, trying to differentiate characters while Emma corrected him loudly and Eliza giggled behind her hands. He tried again, and again, until the twins finally collapsed against him in laughter and told him he wasn't too bad at it anymore. Clara watched from the doorway, arms loosening just a little, heart aching with something complicated and unsteady. He learned their preferences quickly. Emma liked her sandwiches cut in triangles, Eliza preferred squares. Emma loved adventure books, Eliza preferred stories about animals. They both hated itchy scarves. They both loved hot cocoa with extra marshmallows. And they both adored sledding, something Mark had never done in his adult life. He threw himself into it anyway, falling face first into the snow so dramatically that the girls shrieked with delight and demanded he do it again. Clara watched from the bench, trying not to smile, failing every time he pretended to lose balance on purpose just to make the girls squeal. Yet beneath the laughter, beneath the warmth, there was always the quiet tension between Clara and Mark. They rarely spoke about the past, but it hovered between them like a shadow. Mark tried, not to erase it, but to show through action what words could never repair. He arrived early for every meeting with the girls, prepared snacks, bought warm gloves for them after noticing their old ones were thinning, and never complained when the weather grew brutally cold. He simply showed up, steady and present, as if trying to rebuild 3 lost years one careful moment at a time. One evening, after a long day of sledding, the twins fell asleep in Clara's living room, tangled together on the carpet beneath a blanket. Mark knelt beside them, brushing a strand of hair from Eliza's forehead with a reverence that made Clara swallow hard. When he stood again, he found her watching him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "They're incredible," he whispered. "You did an amazing job with them." Clara looked away, her eyes softening. "They're everything." "I can see that," he said. "And I'm grateful you let me be here now. More grateful than I know how to say." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was too much inside her, anger, fear, affection, confusion, twisting like knots she couldn't unravel. Instead she said quietly, "You're trying. I see that." His eyes shone with something like relief. "I'll keep trying." Some days were easier. Others reopened old wounds. There were moments when Clara caught him staring at the twins with a mix of awe and regret so raw she had to look away. There were moments when she snapped too quickly, and he accepted her anger without defending himself. There were moments when the twins asked questions she wasn't ready for. Why did he live far away? Why wasn't he always here? Why had they never met him before? Each question cut sharply, but Mark answered them with a gentleness she didn't expect. He told the truth carefully, that he had made mistakes, big ones he wished he could undo, but that he was here now because he loved them more than anything in the world. Clara listened from the hallway, tears burning her eyes. She didn't wipe them away. One afternoon, Emma scraped her knee on the ice. Instinctively she ran to Clara first, but when Clara pointed to Mark and murmured, "Daddy can help too," Emma hesitated only a second before turning toward him. Mark froze as if afraid the moment wasn't real. He knelt, checked her knee, and placed a small kiss on her forehead, uncertain, trembling. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "It's okay, Daddy." The word hit him like a wave. Clara saw his face break, saw his breath hitch, saw his hands tremble as he held his daughter. He didn't cry, not fully, but tears glimmered in his eyes as he hugged her tighter. Clara had to turn away or she would have fallen apart completely. With each passing week, the walls between them shifted. They didn't crumble, not yet, but they cracked enough to let warmth through. Clara found herself talking to him more, about the girls, about her job, about small things she had never thought to share with him. Mark listened closely, never interrupting, never trying to dominate the conversation the way he used to. He seemed to study her, quietly absorbing every detail as if memorizing the shape of her life. And sometimes, when their eyes met unexpectedly, something old and unfinished flickered between them, something neither of them dared name. But not everything was soft. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Clara and Mark stood in the kitchen, the silence heavier than usual. Mark leaned against the counter, hands trembling slightly. Clara knew he was gathering courage before speaking. "I have to ask," he said at last, voice low. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara stiffened. The old pain rose quickly, sharp as the day she had read his letter. "Because you told me I didn't deserve your time. Because you made it perfectly clear you didn't want a child, let alone two." He winced, but didn't argue. "I know. I know what I wrote. I live with it every day. But if I had known..." She cut him off sharply. "You don't get to say that." He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. "You're right." The admission disarmed her. For a moment she didn't know how to breathe. When he looked at her again, his expression was raw. "I'm not asking you to justify anything. I just wanted to understand how much I hurt you." Clara swallowed hard. "More than you can imagine." Their eyes held, two people tangled in the wreckage of what they'd once been, both terrified of what they might become. Mark nodded slowly. "Then let me spend the rest of my life trying to make sure I never hurt you again." Clara's breath trembled, her heart thundering painfully, but she didn't run from the promise echoing in his voice. She didn't accept it either. Not yet. Instead she whispered, "We'll see." And for the first time, the uncertainty between them didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. Spring arrived slowly in the small town, melting the snowbanks one hesitant layer at a time and revealing patches of muddy grass beneath. The long winter had made everyone restless, especially the twins, who were eager to trade sleds for bicycles and snowmen for chalk drawings on the sidewalks. Clara found her routine changing too. The sun lingered longer each day, slipping through her curtains in gentle gold instead of icy blue, and with every new morning she found herself breathing a little easier. The heaviness she had carried for years didn't disappear, but it softened enough for hope to seep through. And Mark, unexpectedly, impossibly, became part of that new rhythm. He didn't push. He didn't overwhelm. Instead, he adapted his life to theirs, not the other way around. He moved out of his hotel and rented a modest townhouse 5 minutes away. He replaced his sleek designer coats with warm jackets better suited for long walks in muddy parks. He restructured his work schedule, handing off responsibilities he once guarded obsessively, and began splitting his time between the city and the town. Each choice felt deliberate, grounded, humble. He wasn't trying to impress Clara, he was trying to show her, with steady consistency, that he meant to stay. The twins welcomed him with the fierce openness only children possess. Emma started insisting he push her on the swing higher than anyone else dared, while Eliza clung to his hand when she felt shy around strangers. They drew pictures for him, lopsided hearts, messy stick figures, flowers in impossible colors, and he carried each one home, taping them carefully to the walls of his once immaculate office. His life, previously built on clean lines and solitude, now overflowed with crayons, tiny mittens, and the chaotic joy of two little girls who had no idea how much space they had carved into his heart. But the relationship between him and Clara grew in quieter steps. Small, cautious moments that layered slowly, like sediment forming a new foundation after a storm. Some afternoons they walked together while the girls chased each other ahead. They talked about little things at first, the library, the weather, the girls' upcoming birthdays. Gradually, though, the conversations deepened. Mark learned how scared Clara had been during her pregnancy, how lonely the early months of motherhood were, how fiercely she fought to give the twins a life filled with warmth despite how exhausted she was. Clara learned how broken Mark's relationship with his own father had been, how paralyzing the fear of repeating that cycle felt, how deeply he regretted the choices he had made years ago. They didn't rush anything between them. Clara still guarded her heart, and Mark respected her boundaries with a patience he once didn't believe himself capable of. But anyone who watched them from afar could see the difference, the way she no longer stiffened when he stood beside her, the way he no longer seemed afraid of reaching for the future, the way their gazes lingered a little too long when the twins weren't looking. The turning point came on a warm April afternoon during the twins' 5th birthday celebration. Mark had insisted on helping plan the little backyard party, and Clara reluctantly agreed. Together, they decorated the garden with pastel balloons and a banner the girls had painted themselves. A few neighbors came, bringing cookies and small gifts, and children ran around joyfully. Emma and Eliza were radiant in matching dresses, their cheeks flushed from laughter, their hands sticky from frosting. Near the end of the party, as the sun dipped low and cast everything in soft gold, Emma tugged Mark to the center of the yard. "Daddy," she called out, her voice clear and bright enough for the entire group to go quiet. "Make a wish with us." The word echoed, "Daddy," and Clara, standing a few feet away, felt something inside her crack wide open. She saw the way Mark froze for just a heartbeat, saw the way his eyes glistened, saw the way his shoulders trembled before he knelt down slowly, reverently, gathering the twins close. "Okay," he whispered, voice strained. "Let's make a wish." Clara watched silently, her heart a storm of memories and new beginnings. There was a time when that word, "Daddy," would have felt like a wound. Now it felt like healing. When the candles flickered out and applause filled the yard, Clara stepped aside to gather stray plates. Mark approached her quietly, his expression soft, hopeful, uncertain. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "For letting me be part of this." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Clara," he continued, the gentle seriousness in his tone pulling her eyes to his, "there's something I want to ask you. Something I've been wanting to say for a long time, but I didn't feel ready until now." Her breath caught. The garden noise faded into a distant hum. He took a small step closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. "I know I can never change the past. I know I hurt you deeply, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never hurt you again. But these months, being here with you, with them, it's made me realize something. I don't want to be part of your lives only in pieces. I want to build a whole life with you." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. "Mark." He shook his head, gently stopping her before she could push him away. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I've changed. To prove that I can be the partner you deserved back then. To prove that I can be the father they deserve every day. Clara stared at him, every memory, good, painful, beautiful, rushing through her at once. She looked at the twins laughing across the garden. She looked at Mark, standing before her with sincerity that shook her to her core. She looked at her own hands, hands that had carried so much burden alone. And finally, she let herself speak the truth she had been afraid to feel. You already are proving it, she whispered. Every day. His breath shuddered, relief flooding his face. He didn't touch her, didn't push for more. He simply nodded, slow, reverent, grateful. In that moment, Clara realized something. Healing wasn't a single moment of forgiveness. It was 1,000 small choices made every day. It was trust earned carefully. It was love rebuilt like a house after a storm, stronger because of everything it survived. Weeks later, the four of them stood together in the same park where everything had begun. The snow had melted, replaced with wildflowers sprouting timidly along the path. Emma and Eliza ran ahead, weaving through the new blooms. Mark offered his hand, not demanding, not assuming, just offering. Clara looked at it. Then she took it. Not because she had forgotten the past, but because she finally believed in the future. And as they walked forward, fingers entwined, the twins' laughter echoing through the spring air, Clara understood something she never expected to feel again. They hadn't just survived the pain. They had built something beautiful from it. Something whole. Something healing. Something theirs. A family, finally complete.